When I say the name Jason Isaacs, there's a good chance one of these two characters immediately pop into your head, and more than likely you think about this guy. And while it's impossible to ignore the fact that Lucius Malfoy is by far Isaac's most popular character, if you dig just a little bit deeper you'll discover that he has played a staggering amount of interesting villains in his career, some of which you may know, others you may not. So I want to take a look at where he came from and how he became cinema's most elegant villain. Jason Isaacs was born on June 6, 1963 in Liverpool to his two Jewish parents, Sheila and Eric. His father, a jeweler, always pushed his children to be better than him and pursue steady-paying forms of employment. When Jason was 11, the family moved to London, where Jason experienced a lot of bullying for being both Jewish and from a different area of the country. Following in the footsteps of his older brothers, who were a doctor and a lawyer, Isaacs attended Bristol University and chose to study law. However, while obtaining a law degree, Isaacs became very involved with the school's drama society, appearing in numerous plays and performing at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. After graduating, he decided to apply to drama school, not really considering going, but rather just to know he could have gotten in, and to be used as something he could hold over his brothers. However, rather than a letter in the mail that he could always use to gloat over his siblings, he received an admittance lady at his doorstep to tell him he'd been accepted. After having a less than stellar response to the news, she told him none too few of words that a lot of people apply for these spots and he better not be wasting her time.
I so vividly remember walking down the street near Central School, which is where I went, in Swiss Cottage, thinking to myself, have I just changed the course of the rest of my life because it's what I want, or because a very posh woman swore at me?
Soon after graduating drama school, Isaacs began auditioning, landing small bit parts in various TV shows and commercials across the UK. His first real break would also be his first villain role as Lord Felton, the second-in-command baddie in the film Dragonheart, the movie where Sean Connery plays a CGI talking dragon. According to Isaacs himself, the only reason he got this lucky break is that the actor originally cast in the part turned it down at the last minute to take a role in the movie Cutthroat Island, thinking it would be a much bigger hit, and they had already made his costume. Luckily, Isaacs had the same measurements and was chosen to replace him. While this role lacks the sophistication that Isaac's villains would become famous for, it does mark the first villain that he plays on the big screen. After Dragonheart, Isaacs was able to get supporting roles in two big-budget smash hits, Armageddon and Event Horizon, before then being able to land what was his biggest role up to that point, and still one of the most iconic of his career, the Patriot. Isaacs was cast as the role of Colonel William Tavington, perhaps the most evil of Isaacs' career. Once again, he was not the first choice for the role. The producers originally wanted to get Jude Law, but he was taking a long time to give an answer. So, to put pressure on Law, they began interviewing other candidates. And despite knowing the role was already offered to another actor, Isaacs was able to make a strong enough impression to secure the part. Tavington wastes no time establishing himself as the villain, as within the first scene, he burns down the protagonist's house, threatens to hang his son, and then shoots his even younger son. He then goes on to burn a church full of innocent people, and is so unmerciful in his actions, even his British superiors tell him to chill out. Isaacs has called this role deliciously evil, and that there is absolutely no redeemability to the character, which made him a lot of fun to play. After the massive success that was The Patriot, Isaacs has said that he turned down a few villain roles because he felt like they weren't as well written and didn't want to only play one type of character, so he continued to do other parts in movies as well as be involved with multiple successful plays back in England. However, this obviously didn't stop Isaacs taking villain roles forever, starting with Captain Hook in 2003's live-action Peter Pan.
Dreaming of speed.
Although not as well known as the Disney animated classic or the Robin Williams version, this version of Peter Pan did achieve cult classic status, receiving positive reviews but underperforming at the box office. Isaac's portrayal of Hook is a standout performance as he skillfully portrays the character's obsession with capturing Peter Pan and does battle with a CGI crocodile.
Don't touch anything, Draco.
After this, Isaacs landed what would become without a doubt his most famous role, Lucius Malfoy in the Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Though initially Isaacs almost turned down the part. He initially auditioned for the part of Gilderoy Lockhart, but was then asked to read for Malfoy. Having already shot the role as Captain Hook that year, he was reluctant to play another villain in a movie primarily aimed at children and young people. His agent persuaded him to take the weekend to think on it. Over those 2 days, he received a lot of calls from family members urging him to accept the part, which he eventually agreed to. Everything that Isaacs brought to his previous villains, he turned up to 11 for this memorable role: arrogance, hate, drama, and a constant air of superiority. In his first outing, Lucius is the inciting incident that kicks off the film's main plot as he slips Tom Riddle's diary into Ginny Weasley's things, unleashing the Chamber of Secrets on Hogwarts. He also finishes the movie by trying to murder Harry Potter in cold blood after he frees his slave.
You shall not harm Harry Potter!
And while this high-profile role brought Isaac the most recognition of his career, Isaacs himself has stated he finds this funny as it took up very little time in his life, as he'd only be in a few scenes for the subsequent films. And while he's never quite as hateable as he is Ed in his initial outing as a character, Isaacs will continue to make memorable moments as the character for the remainder of the series. In addition, some of the decisions on how Isaacs played Malfoy, while not in the books, became synonymous with the character. This included Isaac's distinct accent he chose, that the director Chris Columbus wasn't always sure was the right move.
Chris goes, I know, I'm thinking about the voice, and Daniel said, I think it sounds really cool.
It was also Isaac's idea to give the character long, flowing, platinum blonde hair, which he would become iconic for. Saying, I went to the set, and they had this idea of me wearing a pinstripe suit, short black and white hair, and I was slightly horrified. He was a racist, he was eugenist. There was no way he'd cut his hair like a muggle or dress like a muggle. It is also worth noting that throughout his career, Jason Isaacs has been very willing to work as a voice actor, playing a wide array of characters throughout TV, movie, and video games. Just within the DC animated movies, he's provided the voice of Superman, Sinestro, Ra's al Ghul, and Lex Luthor.
Accurate, if inelegant. I was in the midst of toppling the economy of Europe.
Two of his most famous voice acting roles also led to two more memorable villains to add to his resume: Admiral Zhao in Avatar: The Last Airbender and the Grand Inquisitor in Star Wars Rebels.
I am a legend now. The Fire Nation will for generations tell stories about the great Zhao who darkened the moon.
While developing the character of Zhao, the creators of Avatar were looking for a militaristic villain that would do whatever it took to win the battle at hand. Even though he was more of a secondary villain to the more present Prince Zuko, the creators were already planting sympathetic seeds of Zuko's motivation throughout the first season, so in turn needed a secondary villain that couldn't be seen as sympathetic in the slightest. They were also looking for a more reserved, methodical villain that would both contrast with the emotional Prince Zuko and the intense Fire Lord Ozai, who would be teased throughout the first season. After seeing that a lot of these traits were shared by Colonel Covington from the Patriot, they inquired if Isaacs would be interested in the role himself. Also, like Covington, Zhao starts the season off as a very in-control villain, and by the end is an ego-obsessed megalomaniac calling himself the Moonslayer before losing everything. Isaacs would also return to voice the character in a scene years later in the follow-up to Avatar: The Legend of Korra, as we see Zhao has been driven mad in a spirit world prison.
I am Zhao the Conqueror. I am the Moonslayer. I will capture the Avatar. I am Zhao the Conqueror. I am the Moonslayer. I will capture the Avatar.
Star Wars Rebels is full of villains, with most of them already having been in multiple pieces of Star Wars media. While it's impossible to say that the Grand Inquisitor is the best, when you have Darth Vader, Maul, and Grand Admiral Thrawn lurking around, I think you can easily call the Grand Inquisitor the best villain that was made for the show. He's the only one of the Inquisitors or General Empire villains that actually feels like they're a threat. He lays well-made traps for the heroes and is actually intimidating, which is something you can't say for all of the villains within Star Wars Rebels. And like Zhao, he is a short stay, again only lasting one season. but due to Isaac's performance, he makes a lasting impact on the show. Isaacs was very interested in bringing this character to live action for the Obi-Wan TV show, but unfortunately scheduling conflicts made this an impossibility. And I unfortunately think that because of this, the character is not nearly as intimidating or memorable in his limited screen time in that show. And while this obviously isn't people's biggest issue with Obi-Wan, I do think if it was Isaacs in that role, it would have made it for a far more powerful performance. On the bright side, that does leave the door open for Isaacs to potentially play other roles within the live-action Star Wars universe. In addition to being on TV and voice acting roles, Isaacs continued to get meaningful villain roles in TV throughout the 2010s in live action as well as in animation. Two significant examples of this were the OA and Star Trek Discovery. In a role that Isaacs calls one of the highlights of his career, he plays the central antagonist of the OA during its 2-season run on Netflix. Hap, as he's called, is a doctor trying to quantify the afterlife, and is using people who have had near-death experiences as forced participants in his experiments. With Hap, Isaacs once again shows the audience that he can make a total monster understandable, because while he kidnaps and kills people, he's doing it to find a cure for suffering, and he does make some incredible discoveries in his work, as twisted as it is. Isaacs, when asked about playing these types of villains, said, "As someone who has played a lot of antagonists, what I've learned is that everybody always thinks they're right. Racists, eugenists, homophobes, misogynists, they think that they're right. They think that other people have an unrealistic and sentimental view of the world, and that they're the only people that see the truth." And while this can be applied to most of Isaac's characters, I find myself seeing it the most in Hap, as he knows what he is doing is wrong, but also thinks that it's worth it for the good that could come out of his research. And to his credit, his work is able to provide proof of an afterlife and bring someone back from the dead. Unfortunately, like many fan-favorite Netflix shows, the OA was unceremoniously cancelled after 2 seasons. Isaacs is very passionate about the show and has stated it's one of the roles he's the most proud of, and would love to see the story continued in some way. Interestingly, he wasn't the first choice for the role, and the show even began shooting with another actor as Hap. Isaacs got the call in the middle of the night and was told by his agent to read the scripts immediately, because if he was interested, he'd have to be on a plane the next day. Isaacs loved the script and was off to New York in the morning.
It's poetic justice, don't you think? Scientist destroyed by his own creation. Just kidding. I hate poetry.
While he was once again only around for the first season of the show, Isaac's performance as Gabriel Lorca in the initial season of Star Trek Discovery is another noteworthy villain role. Unlike most of the antagonists that Isaacs plays, Lorca was initially shown to be a hero before dramatically revealing in fact to be the villain of the story. They definitely did a good job of making him a hard but likable captain throughout most of the season, as he breaks the rules and is hard on the people around him, but is played as dedication to the war effort in a win by any means necessary kind of way. Then, slowly showing that he in fact was manipulating events just to get his way was pretty great to watch. Lorca is definitely still a fan favorite character of the show, and while he may be gone, Isaacs is quick to point out in interviews that a version of Lorca could still be out there, always hinting that he could be interested in reprising the role if the circumstances worked out. Though I can fully admit I haven't seen every single piece of media where Jason Isaacs plays a villain, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some that I have. Heck, I haven't even mentioned that he voices the Emperor in the Netflix Dark Crystal series. I believe this speaks to the range of roles and the immenseness of his body of work, that there are many more instances where he is a villain and hundreds of appearances where he doesn't. Because while he certainly plays a fantastic antagonist, he's also just a tremendous actor that brings a lot to every role he takes. If you want proof of this, you could check out some of his works, like the brutally depressing Mass, which I feel like he easily could have received more recognition from, or the darkly hilarious The Death of Stalin, because he's fantastic in both. Honestly, it's a shock to me that he has very few major award nominations in his career, because he is great in every role I've seen him in.
Feel okay.
Medic! Not today!
I know what happened.
No, you do not know how my son died! You do not know! I know!
Just to illustrate the range he possesses, even just in his villainous performances, here are two very different movies, both of which he plays the primary antagonist. In Scoob, he plays a classic villain, Dick Dastardly, in a very silly movie, and while he is a cartoon villain in the classic sense, he still has motivations that are sympathetic as he's trying to get his dog back.
I'm too late. I've been searching for years, my friend, and I didn't make it in time.
At the other end of the spectrum, his performance as the evil doctor in A Cure for Wellness, a not great horror movie that has Isaacs dial his calm, calculating mannerisms to a terrifying level that results in some of the most stomach-churning moments I have ever witnessed in a horror movie.
Do you know what the cure for the human condition is? Disease.
Honestly, Isaacs is just in a lot of stuff, regardless of medium or budget level, and he's showing no signs of slowing down. I literally just saw him play villainous Frog in an episode of American Dad.
Greg's in there, eat him.
No. He smells. It's you we want.
It's legitimately crazy to me how much stuff he's in, and I'm completely down to see what kind of weird and terrifying roles he'll continue to take in the future.
Purple Hippo Cinema. Purple